going to be followed by Agnes Kwek. It's a real delight to have her to share her expertise as the former design ambassador of Singapore.
Well, thanks very much for the introduction, Yvonne, and it's lovely to be here. Thank you, Evie, for the invite. I'm going to talk to you about my experience in using design in the Singapore government. And what I really hope to do is to give you a peek behind the curtains in terms of how do civil servants think. When you mention the word design, what immediately comes to mind? What are they concerned about when using design in government? And what are the barriers to using design in government? And if you are out there and you're a designer, whether you're working in government itself or government is your clients, then how should you approach design and how should you approach your projects? So it's really from a practitioner's point of view. Just a little bit of background. I'll speak to you across 3 different perspectives of my experience with design in the Singapore government. The first is in terms of incubating in-house capabilities. So this was my job when I was director overseeing public service, innovation and service delivery under the Prime Minister's office. And I started the first in-house design lab for the Singapore government. The second perspective that I'm bringing to the table is how do you bring design within an operational department to transform its practices? And this is me talking about my experience as a Chief Transformation Officer for Land Transport Authority in Singapore. And the final perspective is as a former Executive Director of Design Singapore Council in terms of growing the entire ecosystem of design for a country. So without further ado, let me just bring up my slides. And my presentation is entitled Practical Lessons in Using Design in Government. I've had the honor and privilege of speaking to many international people in the world of design. And very often I hear them say that they see Singapore as a yardstick of a design-led country and a design-led nation. And indeed, the Singapore Public Service has been using design thinking to address a whole host of challenges in order to keep up the changing world. And the next couple of slides will just show you some of my favorite examples. This is one that I personally worked on, is on infrastructure. And here transport planners were asking, how do we make public transport lovable? And basically it required a shift for the entire planning process, where normally you're given a plot of land, here's where we're going to plonk a station, and this is how much land we need for the tracks or the power supplies and so on and so forth. They did not do that. In fact, the first question that they started with was, how do we see people using this space? And as a result of that design thinking process, they have developed a train station that is actually integrated with a community space where the community, which involves not just residents, but also a nearby university and a business park, can come together and meet within this space. This is a second example of customer journey. And the Changi Airport group was asking themselves, how do we make the best airport in the world even better? If you've traveled to Singapore before, some of you might have realized that Changi Airport is really consistently ranked the best airport in the world for several years in a row. And this resulted in Terminal 4, which they termed the R&D Terminal. And it is an ongoing prototype for testing and user research for new technologies, including security scanning and self-check-in. And they left no detail to chance. The entire customer journey in this airport was broken down and examined with a really fine-tooth comb. And it resulted in new experiences such as even curbless driveway. So it's easier for you to pull your bags from the car into the airport when you first arrive. This is another example for citizen services for parenting, right? So in Singapore, we face a declining birth rate. The declining and aging population is really of a concern to us. And 15 agencies sat down and said, how do we make this better? Now, why 15? Because when we mapped up the entire citizen journey, from the moment that you know that, or you're trying to plan for kids, you would touch 15 different agencies in terms of the kind of transactions that you've had. So top executives visited the homes of citizens. And it's through that, that really intimate experience that they realized so much more can be done in order to improve the experiences for parents. And that resulted in this app called Moments of Life, or Life SG, and it has seamless transactions with 5 different government agencies now for parents, all the way from registering your kid's birth to getting vaccinations to finding preschools, and in the future for also registering your kids for national public schools. Now, an unexpected thing. Design also happens in defense technology, and DSTA, which is our Defense Science and Technology Agency, has up to date trained over 1,000 engineers in design thinking. And you're thinking, what has design thinking got to do with designing tanks and guns and ammunitions and bombs? And the fact is this, again, we face a declining birth rate, and we know that in the future, there will be fewer men to serve in the national service. So in Singapore, serving national service is compulsory. And so everything that these engineers design has to be intuitive, right? Easy to use, and also you're able to operate it with fewer people. And that's really the driving factor for design thinking for DSTA. In short, I love this quote from our Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong. He said, design is a core element of our nation building, and Singapore is a nation by design. Nothing that we have is natural or happened by itself. And to me, this really sums up the entire sort of mindset of how our founding fathers and in the early pioneer generations of civil servants have approached policy making and implementation. The key thing is that we were driven by survival. In the early days of Singapore. Today, we're only 56 years old as a country, really, really young. But in the early days, with very little land, a largely uneducated and immigrant population, the key thing for us was, how do we survive in this world? And that really grew a whole design mindset around how we do that. And what is a design mindset? I would say it's about having bold ambitions, but a relentless focus on implementation. So when I was growing up as a young civil servant in Singapore, our elders would always tell us, policy is implementation. No matter what are the best intentions that you have, if it's not properly implemented, it will fail. And then a whole of government approach. So doing something, trying to change something, requires many different agencies to come together. So this is the story to date of some of the examples of how Singapore has used design thinking. But then here's my story of what it really takes to bring design thinking into government. It's been a 10-year journey for me, and I am very lucky to have a front row seat in bringing design thinking into government. And I would say that, and here's the story I want to tell you. I went to do a work attachment in IDEA in San Francisco in 2013, and I was there for a year, learning how to do design thinking like an IDEA consultant. And I came back to Singapore full of energy and hope and optimism, going, yes, I've really got this. Let's go and change some things now. And then I was seconded as a Chief Transformation Officer to a large operational agency. And I have to tell you that I don't quit easily. But within 8 months, I just wanted to quit. I wanted to leave. Nothing was happening. No change was taking place. And everywhere I turned, it seems that doors were being slammed in my face. And it was a really uphill battle to try to convince people that design was worth it, that it was going to lead to really powerful changes for our users, and that we should be investing time and energy into this. So what really happened? I learned the hard way, and this is what I'm hoping that you learn from me. I learned the hard way about the 4 horsemen of design death in government. And in short, the trade-offs, disruption, committees, and what I call grandfathering. Now, if you want to read more, please go and visit my blog. It's a really long article, so I can't talk about everything in great detail. But basically, trade-offs. If you are trying to improve the user experience of one set of users, it inevitably means a trade-off somewhere else. And this is just a reality of the fact that we're operating in government. And disruption. Stability is prized above all else. If you want change to take place, and much less to say exciting change, then it really involves trying to move into a new state. and disrupting a lot of legacy systems, whether it's in IT, in personnel, in organizational structure. And trying to implement change in government and in policy requires a whole network of related agencies to come together, and that inevitably means setting up committees. So I'm talking about committees as a design, as one of the horsemen, but it really just means, how do you bring everyone to the table? That sucks up a lot of energy, a lot of effort and mind space, and usually people are very unwilling to do that. And lastly, grandfathering. This is a term that we use in a Singapore public service. It means when you're trying to close off a policy or a program, you have a whole huge long tail at the end of people who were under the current policy or program that you have to think of how to exit them from that program. And for all these 4 reasons, trying to bring design, trying to have a really exciting vision or improving user experience that inevitably means new programs, new ways of doing things, it's just really, really hard in government. And what I wish I had known back then was this, and what I wish if someone would tell me, like I'm telling you now, what are some of the ways to hedge against this design death? And I've learned that if you want to hedge against the 4 horsemen of design death, you really need these 4 things. You need to make sure that the case that you're putting forward does, at the end of the day, address long-term challenges for the government. Long-term challenges, again, for us in Singapore, there's 2 very key ones that we're always looking at: lack of land and declining population or aging population. And if any one of your design ideas can go towards addressing these, then the chances are that you have a much better chance to make it happen. And in government, you need to be looking at designing a system of solution, not just one beautiful solution or a beautiful user experience, but really a system of solutions that may not be individually as sexy in it by themselves, but together will make sense to tip the whole system away. In government, you're really designing as much for the quality of conversations, because bearing in mind that you do need many different parties to come together, not just different government agencies, but it could be with the private sector, with the community groups. And the job of a designer is to design those conversations as much as designing the solution. And finally, I would say that the 4th one, improving trust in government, is a really important factor that sometimes can trump even the first 3. Even if the first 3 are not present, the fact that you're designing for such a key moment of interaction that will improve trust in government just by delivering better services, that will improve to that will strengthen the social fabric, that in it by itself is so important that sometimes it could just shift the whole needle. What I've learned is that designing in government is to be a designer in complexity. I think I see the whole evolution of the design industry, again, wearing in my previous hat as the executive director of Design Singapore Council, that the design industry has also moved and also had to evolve. First, we were talking about designing the design. And here we're really talking about craft mastery, how great products are, digital, how great communications are. Then we've had design thinking and service experience design, user centricity. And then we really moved as an industry into designing the brief, right? What should be the vision? What should be a great experience? And the third that I have learned that design in government is about is actually designing the politics of the brief. Now, what do I mean by that? I'm really talking about this. The politics of the brief requires 4 approaches in terms of addressing and breaking down complexity, and I call them P.A.V.E, P-A.V.E, and that's problem framing, alignment seeking, vision building, and exploration. The first 2, P and the A, are really about how do you set up to derive collective intelligence. It is really an analytical thing. You need to understand how do you frame the problem, not just in today's terms, but possibly in terms 10 years down the road. You need to seek alignment. Who needs to be involved in this? What is your stakeholder analysis and engagement? Then you need to organize for collective action. which is a more emotive sort of thing, right? We want to build the vision. This is what we want the future to be. We need to storytell. We need to have a North Star. And then this is how we might get there in terms of explorations and experiments and pilots. Now, here's where I see design thinking typically focus on today. It starts with vision, and then it goes into pilots and programs. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But in complex environments, like if you're designing government, that is not enough. I feel that complex challenges requires designers to invest time and effort in the upfront part of the equation, really framing the problem and seeking the alignment. And this is how I've seen success stories in this. It requires 3 different approaches to come together. First, in terms of futures thinking, asking what forces will shape our operating environment X years from now on, and really having a very analytical and robust approach to that. And that's bringing in futures thinking and scenario planning, for example. You need systems thinking by analyzing who's going to be impacted and whose involvement do we need. Then you need design, which is what are people experiencing today and how can they be better supported in their experiences for tomorrow? And it's really in the intersection of all these 3 different approaches that you'll get great design in government. You need to look at emergent behaviors. So how will different stakeholders respond to the new forces, and how will the dynamics between them change tomorrow? You need to design for collective action, and that's also the quality of the conversations, but understanding your stakeholder mapping really, really well. So what's motivating or holding back our stakeholders, and how do we factor these into alliance building? And finally, then you're able to design the future experience. So how might people thrive in the face of tomorrow's challenges or opportunities, and what support will they need? Then that allows us to design really for the future. What are the challenges and opportunities that tomorrow might bring? What does success look like? Who do we need to design solutions for? And who holds the keys to those questions? And so that, in short, for me, is my practical lesson in bringing design into government. I have exited the public service as of May this year, and I have set up my own practice. It's called mindthesystem.com. If you visit my website, you'll see my writings about the 4 horsemen of design death, and you see all these different frameworks and approaches as well. So thanks very much for the invite.